belt is, there's clearly enough room for another large planet to have a free orbit within that area. And a lot of people would speculate, well, you know, is Nibiru, every time it passes through the inner part of the solar system, is it going to cause great havoc? And I think I left this out earlier in saying that this is one of the reasons the Sumerians said they had a great flood, is when Nibiru came through the inner part of the solar system, it caused gravitational effects here on Earth that cracked off parts of the ice sheet in Antarctica and raised the water level significantly. So that's what caused the Great Flood by the Sumerian descriptions, is this intruder planet has gravitational effects on the solar system, specifically Earth, as it comes through. So people have postulated, well, when's the next time it's going to come through? Is it going to have you know, catastrophic effects as it has in the past? So I show a simple math here that says roughly 4.7 billion years ago was when this interaction took place from the creation of our solar system and Nibiru coming in. And Nibiru having a 3,600-year orbit, meaning it goes around the sun every 3,600 years. So if we divide 3,600 years by the time it initially entered our solar system, you're looking at over 1 million times it's made that orbit. So I postulate that not every time Nibiru comes into the inner part of the solar system, where we are in relation to the sun might not always get some catastrophic effect, but it might. So another interesting point from the Anunnaki is they have depictions and stories of what they called Ijiji, which were helpers of the Anunnaki that assisted them in medical and also flying their craft. Well, the Ijiji have very similar characteristics to what we call modern-day gray aliens or extraterrestrials. And they left us small figurines and depictions of what these Ijiji look like. And you can see that they have very similar characteristics to what we would call the modern-day gray alien. Large, bulbous heads, eyes, very similar to what we know as the grays. And so I've left the theory and postulated the idea that modern-day abductions, in fact, do take place. With anyone looking into this research from Bud Hopkins and Jacobs and just many other lines of looking into this theory that people have been, for lack of a better word, abducted and then analyzed medically, reproductively by these type of beings. Why? For what purpose? Well, I theorize it's very possible if the Anunnaki did create us genetically, they could also be working with another genetic manipulation or another race that's here for their purpose of conveying to the Anunnaki this information. What's going on with us medically, genetically, socially. So it's just, you know, if the Anunnaki are on this planet very far away, it's possible they could have, you know, mitigators that are here kind of helping with their grand experiment. That's just a theory I threw out there, but when we look at these artifacts that come from the Sumerians, there is a large similarity in the descriptions of what they give for the Ijiji to the modern-day gray aliens, basically performing their tasks of doing a medical checkup on us. So very interesting information. So another point to start kind of wrapping it up for tonight is one of the things that initially really sparked my interest. I'm 33 next week, actually. And what initially sparked my interest as a college student is someone had tangentially mentioned that there were artificial structures on Mars, a face and pyramids. And as a college layman, you know, not having any knowledge of UFOs or extraterrestrial archaeology, I was very skeptical to this information and decided to do my own independent analysis, and found that while I was attending college in San Diego, there was an organization called Malin Space Science Systems who controls several of the orbiters we still have, the Themis, Odyssey, Mars Global Surveyor, launched in 1998, that are still in orbit around Mars. And here's another one that's going to be launching very soon, here in 2007. And these are all projects that, again, for a long time have been showing us features of Mars that some are under very high scrutiny. Now, I asked Mike Malin, Dr. Mike Malin of Malin Space Science Systems, point blank, is there any possibility that there's artificial structures on Mars? The face, the pyramids, anything? And he said, no, these are all sand, natural wind, weather eroded structures, you know, no alien stuff going on. And that really raised my interest to want to look into these topics for myself. And so what I've kind of showing you here is that there is a lot of new missions that are going to be happening over the next few years where the amount of data and information we're going to start processing is just mind-boggling. If you look here, the amount of data that's being processed by the information, you can see 16 gigabytes, 10, 12, all the way up to 37.4, and then we jump all the way up to 34 terabytes, where the amount of information that's going to be able to be stored and collected is just unbelievable, that we're going to be able to start seeing clarity released through these NASA images. Now, unfortunately, there's another side to the NASA story of NASA, National Aeronautics Association, could also stand for never a straight answer, because a lot of the information we see comes out of NASA that shows, well, they don't always give us the full picture. But hopefully, with this type of advancements, you can see here the centimeter pixel technology of imaging something versus 30 meters in pixel technology is going to be much more detailed in what we're allowed to see. So, this is very interesting to note that there is a large push by the Bush administration to start to look for or publicly condone the idea of life on Mars. All of a sudden, water flowing on Mars, salt water on Mars. Is there bacteria on Mars? This is information that's been around for a very long time. But as you'll see over the next few years, there's going to be a much larger push once again to send orbiters and landers to start getting new telemetry and data. And I predict that in the very near future, this is where first signs of life will be publicly acknowledged. Not publicly found, because that's a joke. It's been there for a long time, publicly acknowledged. So what I like to talk about here is some of the more esoteric stuff that NASA has not been able to publicly acknowledge, because it's very simple. In the inception of NASA in the early 60s, late 50s, NASA consulted a big think tank called the Brookings Institute, which advised NASA, if your astronauts ever come into contact with extraterrestrial DNA, or for instance come into contact with an extraterrestrial civilization, the astronauts would, 1, need to be quarantined from the public, 2, the information would need to be quarantined from the public for religious, political, sociological reasons, that this would have to be selectively told to the information, based upon its worth on declassifying it to the public. So just some simple stuff that we see here, a comparison of Mars and Earth. Mars is about half the size of Earth. Looks like a dead planet now. And this is one of the initial probes that I got interested in, the Mars Global Surveyor. But these images go all the way back to the 70s, when the Viking 1 and 2 orbiters first snapped off this, and NASA labeled it head. And they said, oh, it's just a trick of light and shadow, and it went away after several missions. We took pictures of it, and it wasn't there anymore. Wrong answer. It turns out that NASA imaged this face, and you can see that the sun angle must be, the sun is over there. You can see the shadows casting down to the angle. Well, they took another orbital pass where the angle of the sun was at a completely different position, and the position of the orbit was at a different angle, and it still looked like a face on a completely different slide. So NASA was like, oh, well, we don't really know what to say other than it's just not a face. We're not going to accept that. So this whole region has things being shown that are very interesting. And what I like to point out here, and this is where I will use my laser pointer, is there's also something being shown here that if you look right where I'm doing my cursor, there looks like a terrain change where it's all knobby, bright terrain, and it kind of mellows out into more non-nobulous, darker terrain, kind of like as if it were water. So I theorize that these are all objects that were built around water. Let me see in my next slide. Maybe I have a better picture here. Okay, here we go. Just like we have monuments like the Washington Monument or the Statue of Liberty surrounded by water, here on Earth we all love to live on beachfront property or by a lake. Why wouldn't that be the case on Mars? And it looks like the face and pyramids were built in a way where the pyramids are all on a landmass. Let me go back here. That you can see, it looks like right as if they're on a shoreline where the face would be situated out in water that could be looked out by all the shoreline structures and admired. So very interesting layout of saying these structures possibly could be large pyramidal structures that were, at some point an ancient city. And it was surrounded by water, edifying the face as a monument. Now the face on Mars has really had some interesting history, and the quality of images has seemed to have gotten worse over the years for some reason. If you look here on the bottom, in 1976, the progression of technology and imaging has gotten worse. Now, I'm not really sure why this is, because it's only for the region of Cydonia where the pyramid and the face are. There's been other areas that show, and I think I might have a slide of this, that show that there's been manipulation of grayscale imagery, meaning in grayscale imagery you have 256 shades of gray, and some of these areas that were shot over Cydonia, there's only 64 shades of gray. They've actually taken out the data, and the actual slides, the raw slides from NASA, you had to Photoshop enhance these and really bring up the contrast to actually see anything. But any other part of Aries Borealis or a part of Mars, it's crystal clear resolution, you know. So it's very interesting. Now this was done in 1998, and you can see that it's very hard to actually make out the face. Or is it? What I've done is taken this face, and I chose the worst one. This was the worst image that they could provide. I'd say, okay, let me throw this back at you. When you take the face and you rotate it so that it's looking at you head on, like a face would be, and I cut it down the middle, so there's a left and a right half, look what we get. Left, right half. So if we just look at the right half, what we see here on the right side, it's that one half mirrored, just like our faces are supposed to be asymmetrical. You get this on the right. And it looks very face-like in the sense that we can see eye sockets, nose, mouth, some type of symmetry. But this less eroded left side, when flipped and mirrored, well, hey, what do we have here now? Now we see symmetry that can show that there's symmetry around the face, some type of headdress, eyes, nose, mouth, coming out of a monument that was sculpted out of wind and sand. So this, again, is very interesting symmetry to be coming out of an artifact that's shown on Mars and is skeptically known as possibly a face on Mars. But no one really ever analyzes the data where they can split it in half and look at it. NASA has not given the fortitude of research that this deserves. But I was able to find 5 to 10 peer-level review scientists with PhDs and imaging credentials to look at this data and say this does merit further study. One of the persons I am a big advocate of is a gentleman named Dr. Mark Carlotto, who's done a lot of algorithms on the Mars telemetry, just as he's done with Russian satellite telemetry, so that we take satellite imagery of Russia and we can run these mathematical algorithms to say, oh look, that's actually a tank being shielded by some shrubbery or by a tarp. But the mathematical algorithms would say, it has 98% probability to be artificial. And it pointed out things like the tanks and stuff. These algorithms run on the face, and the pyramids show that these have, like the face, is a 98% probability to be artificial. None of this type of stuff was ever done by NASA, or at least publicly talked about. So just showing again here that in 1976, this original, the red images, compared to in 1998, you can see zoomed in much closer on some of these objects, and they still, versus that time period, look to be pyramidal structures. So I theorize that if we ever do actually send us back to Mars instead of these little rovers, we might find that we have a much greater history with Mars than we really currently know about. So I'm going to kind of go ahead and wrap it up there. I think I have a couple other slides to show you here, but the information for where we come from is really has a lot of unturned stones. And again, as I've tried to show you tonight, when we look at the evidences for ancient technology from various cultures, not just the Sumerian cultures, power of flight, megalithic monuments, it starts to raise the question of where do we come from?